Did you know Christopher Columbus was funded by a woman he ended up beefing with? That same woman was the queen who unified Spain. She also battled and won the last Muslim stronghold on Spain and used to hang up her daughter by ropes when she misbehaved. Speaking of daughters, she had 4 of them and all 4 of them became queens in Europe. One of them even married King Henry VIII. Welcome to the story of Queen Isabella of Castile, also known as Isabella de Castile. Isabella was born April 22nd, 1451, and she died November 26, 1504. Born to Juan I of Castile and his second, much younger wife, Isabella of Portugal. In his previous marriage, her father had had 4 kids with his first wife, however, only one of them was still alive when she was born, her older brother, Enrique. And then when she's 2, she has a little brother, Alfonso, join the pack. The kids are pretty close to their mother, and they remain close to their mother when their father dies and her half-brother, Enrique, takes the throne. He becomes King Henry IV of Castile, or King Henry the Impotent. A hilarious burn. She took a pretty early interest in politics, even though she was the only sister with 2 brothers, and it was pretty uncommon for women to get involved in all this mess. But Isabella was brought to the court as just a young teenager. And what I need you to get about the 1400s in Europe at this time is that all these little kingdoms are related and they're either fucking or they're fighting. They're all some sort of cousins, some sort of frenemy, some sort of ally, some sort of enemy. And it's flip-flopping all the time. During her brother's reign is no exception. And a big part of that was a lot of people didn't believe old impotent Henry over there actually fathered his heir. So a lot of the nobles were putting their foot down and they wanted little Alfonso to be the next heir. But then shortly after that, the nobles switched their support to Isabella since Alfonso died. And Isabella's like, ew, fuck off, I don't want to be in your war and hang out with you. But anyway, then there's a civil war about the whole thing. Portugal's also involved, and then Portugal kind of goes broke, so then they pull out. The whole thing is called a draw, and then her brother's like, hey, thanks for not joining them. You're gonna be my heir. And when he dies a year later, she is named Queen Isabella of Castile. But even before she became queen and was just named the heir, she was already pulling a lot of power in Europe. Then she had this dope-ass kingdom in front of her. A lot of the allied kingdoms were slutting out their princes and sending them over, trying to betroth to her. Though her marriage should have been the king's decision, she was kind of like, fuck you, bro, and she just picked her own spouse. Her and her small council of cardinals decided that the winner was going to be Fernando of Aragon, who would later become King Ferdinand II. And just like us right now, the people back then were all up in their business. And the Castilians do not like her new man from that other kingdom. And so of course a rebellion starts and people start to proposition her brother's illegitimate child from before and that she should actually be the queen instead of Isabella. And those beliefs didn't really let up for a while, and for the first 4 years of Isabella's reign, it is completely war-torn in a civil war. But she ends up winning and pissing off Portugal. No time to dwell on that though, because later in the year, her father-in-law, King John of Aragon, dies, and her husband, Fernando, becomes King Ferdinand II of Aragon, as we know and love him. Which meant now these 2 constituent kingdoms of Spain were run by the same household. But power is everything. And Isabella is an autonomous ruler, whose power is drawn from her right to the Castilian throne. So in Castile, Ferdinand is seen as her king consort, only because the 2 had signed a marriage pact that had made them the top dog for each of their inherited kingdoms. They also agreed Isabella would not be separated from her children, and that they would spend the majority of their time in Castile. And now that we've unified Spain, we can really start looking at the enemies and problems, people who aren't Catholic enough. And Izzy and Fifi famously set up the Tribunal of the Holy Office, a secret police force working for the court, which you might know better as the Spanish Inquisition. And I'm going to skim through it here, but don't worry because we're doing a full series on this family and we're going to talk a lot about the Spanish Inquisition. And on top of all that, the king and queen also got to work on expanding territory. Castile started acquiring more land and collecting the wealth from these religious territories that were previously governed by local nobles. Isabella was headstrong. She would take you on. She would take on anyone. So she leaned into completing the Reconquista, which was a series of battles meant to reconquer Spanish territory that had been taken by the Muslims. And she did it. She reconquested Granada back to Spain, furthering her quest to rule a united Christian kingdom. And a lot of people give Isabella more credit than her husband for the victory in this battle, since she stayed to aid the military and refused to weaken their forces despite her husband feeling like they should divide them so that they could help fight the French. And while Isabella is in Santa Fe doing medieval war girl shit, she's visited by some kooky self-taught Italian dude who claims he's gonna go through India's back door. It's Christopher Columbus, and he's got all these kooky calculations, and he's like, we can do it. And basically every king at the time is like, you are ugly and we don't believe you. But Isabella is intrigued because her husband and Aragon are already all up in that exploration shit, and she wants to put her hat in the ring. So her and her council approve Columbus's mission, they give Chrissy Boy some coin, and they send him on his way. And then he found the Caribbean, and Castile and Isabella got exclusive trade rights. And they're like, oh my god, this is great, we can spread more Christianity. And Christopher Columbus is like, yeah, and we can do some other stuff too. And then they're both kind of like, what? And then he doesn't really listen to her much after that. He kind of does his own thing on the continent. That is truly a whole other video. Isabella is still in Spain doing that thing I think about every single day, the Spanish Inquisition, which is my literal Roman Empire. As queen, Isabella took a particular interest in education and Latin and funding scholars, which is a trend that we would see a lot in her children later on. Speaking of her children, let's talk about them for a second, because as great and notable as she is as a ruler, she was absolutely fucked as a parent. Imagine stepping out of line with the most powerful queen in Europe as your mother. Your mother, who started a torture police force. Yeah, shit got dark for those kids. Her and her husband had 5 children. They had their daughter, Isabella of Aragon, Queen of Portugal, their only son, Juan, their daughter, Juana I of Castile, Queen of Aragon, their other daughter, Maria of Aragon, Queen of Portugal, and of course, Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England. Isabella would actually go on to outlive her 2 oldest children, her only son, Juan, dying in October of 1497. And her oldest daughter, Isabella, and Isabella's only son, both also died shortly after, which meant the crown was now to be passed to the 3rd oldest child, Juana, who even when Isabella was alive, was showing signs of being a little bit mentally unstable, and would later famously earn herself the nickname Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad in English. And her youngest 2 daughters were married off to be the Queen of Portugal and England, respectively. Maria married her dead sister's husband, King Manuel I of Portugal, and they pumped out like 8 kids together. And Catherine of Aragon famously married King Henry VIII after being married to his brother that died, Prince Arthur. And the 2 of them famously had Queen Mary I. But it would be Juana who takes the throne, she and her husband, who was a Habsburg, Philip I, or Philip the Handsome, who should have been named Philip the Disgusting. And it's her who would take the throne when Isabella would get super sick and die in her early 50s. And we're gonna get all into the stories, especially Juana la Loca. However, first we need to hop on over to Aragon and see what her husband was up to during all of this. So if you want to know how King Ferdinand ruled Aragon while Isabella was ruling Castile, I'll see you in the next one.